All right, today we are talking about one of the most controversial rituals in Valentinian Gnosticism, and this has to do with some of its very sensual elements. Now, I can't say the words exactly because of YouTube, but you get what I mean, the sensual elements involved. We're going to be taking a deep look at this controversial ritual and saying not only is it just controversial, but it's one of the most important and critical rituals in Gnosticism. We're going to be exploring its details. We're going to be exploring its symbolism. We're going to be exploring what it means. It's going to be good, and we're going to get right into it. But as always, before we start, please like and subscribe. This is what helps get this information out there. We are here to create a new consciousness. This isn't just entertainment. It's here to actually help the world by getting people to understand themselves and reality better so we can live in a better, more prosperous new world. So please hit like and subscribe so that we can share this around. Also, if you want to see my channel grow, if you want to support this channel and help my work out, support over on Patreon, patreon.com/MorgueOfficial, and you'll get access to all of our members-only videos. There's a lot of them. A new members-only video comes out every single week. That's a lot. So you can support by going to patreon.com/MorgueOfficial and supporting at any tier, or tier 2 or higher right here on YouTube by hitting the join button below this video. Also, be on the lookout. There are people and scammers. I see more and more every day. There are a lot of scammers in the comments pretending to be me. They're commenting and DMing people on other platforms and saying to join my WhatsApp and my Telegram. That's not me. Don't fall for it. Also, there are people and groups out there who don't like what we're doing, don't like my message, don't like what I'm doing, and are spreading a lot of misinformation and disinformation about me and our group and what we do. So just be on the lookout, use logic and reason, and don't fall for the BS. All right, my friends, here we go. One of the most controversial rituals in Gnosticism. Like I said, it's controversial because of its proposed sensual elements involved that we're going to be discussing here, but it's also one of the most critical and important rituals because of what it means, what it symbolizes, what it has to do with gnosis, knowledge, and enlightenment, and the true nature of reality. Now, this information, we originally didn't know much about this specific ritual. We just heard little snippets of it from here and there throughout history by different people that were talking about it. Usually heretic hunters like Saint Irenaeus wrote a little bit about it in his book, Adversus Heresies Against Heresies. And also, where this comes from now is in 1945. We, of course, discovered the Nag Hammadi Library, a bunch of Gnostic texts that were buried near the tombs of ancient Egypt. One of these Gnostic texts is the Gospel of Philip. This, like all the rest of the Nag Hammadi Gospels, this was a banned gospel. Now, if you've ever watched The Da Vinci Code or read the book The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, in it they talk about Jesus Christ kissing Mary Magdalene, and they are referencing the Gospel of Philip because it's in the Gospel of Philip where Christ kisses Mary Magdalene, which is, of course, very, very controversial and has to do actually with this particular ritual that we are talking about. And you're going to see that there's a lot of themes in the Gospel of Philip. We're not going to really do any kind of deep dive into the Gospel of Philip today. If you want to see more about the Gospel of Philip and you want to hear more about Christ's relationship with Mary Magdalene in that and just what's in the Gospel of Philip in general, let me know in the comments below. If you guys want to see that, we'll do videos and live streams about that as well. But in this Gospel, it talks about Christ kissing Mary, and it describes some of this ritual as well as other rituals. But this was the sort of final sacrament. There were different ones leading up to it, and this was the final sacrament. And like I said, it has elements of it that are possibly sensual. And the reason why I say possibly sensual is because it's debated on whether this was a ritual that was actually physically done, or if it was something that was metaphorical and never actually performed. So we're going to jump right into it and take a look at this right now. So I'm going to bring up an article that we're going to be reading from, and this article is found on scottandsadie.wordpress.com, and it talks about the ritual here. Let's bring it up. So this particular ritual that we're talking about is called the bridal chamber. So this is a ritual of the bridal chamber. And like I said, there were a series of other different rituals that led up to this one, but this one is the pinnacle. And so the reason why that it's called the ritual of the bridal chamber is it's because, well, let's just start reading and you'll see why. And rituals like this is what got heretic hunters like the church father Saint Irenaeus to hate the Gnostics, and they accused the Gnostics of being sexually perverse and things like that. But if you look into this, you'll see that, you know, I mean, just think about a lot of Christianity today that calls things that are perfectly fine perverse or sinful or whatever. So you had the same thing going on back then, where they would, you know, claim that the Gnostics were sinful and blasphemous and perverse and all that, when most of them really, you know, just like people today, most of them aren't. I mean, yeah, there's some weirdos out there, but for the most part, Christians are just labeling things as sinful and wrong, which aren't. But let's dive into this and you'll see what I mean, what we're talking about here. So it says one of the rituals that the Valentinian Gnostics practiced was unique and called the bridal chamber, according to the Gospel of Philip. Okay, so now we're going to read a little bit or an excerpt of the Gospel of Philip. And remember, the Gospel of Philip is the gospel where Christ kisses Mary Magdalene. It says here, if the female had not separated from the male, the female and the male would not have died. The separation of male and female was the beginning of death. Christ came to heal the separation that was from the beginning and reunite the two, in order to give life to those who died through separation and unite them. A woman is united with her husband in the bridal chamber, will not be separated again. That is why Eve separated from Adam, because she had not united with him in the bridal chamber. So, I'm going to discuss that in a minute, but it says here, so what does this mean? In the Valentinian school of Christianity, the coupling of the male and female in an androgynous spiritual union symbolized wholeness, perfection, harmony, and stability. All right, so let's break this down. So we have this ritual called the ritual of the bridal chamber, and what it has to do is a union of male and female counterparts. So this was a ritual that was reserved only for a select few. And of course, one of the big things about this is that some people believe that, oh, well, it was just done in a symbolic way. But others believe that there was a literal union of a man and a woman in this particular ritual. Now, we don't know if that is true or not. It may have been, it may have not been. But what's important to understand here is the symbolic meaning behind this particular ritual that we're going to be breaking down and exploring. So, do I know if it was literally a sensual act like that or not? I don't know, but I will say that the meaning behind this particular ritual was much beyond, it has deep implications. So let's explore this. And the reason why it's important is because if you'll notice in the Gospel of Philip, there's a lot of this interplay of male and female, where you have this ritual, the bridal chamber, and then of course you have Jesus kissing Mary, again, a union of male and female. And this starts to get into the idea of like what the New Age talks about, twin flames. But we're going to see this idea of twin flames is actually a projection. The idea of twin flames is real, but not in the way that most people think. And so this particular ritual, this ritual of the bridal chamber, has to do with that concept. But the truth about that concept, the reality of that concept, not the kind of projected understanding that many people have it today. So let me just read to you again that passage from the Gospel of Philip as we explore this ritual more and more. So it says, if the female had not separated from the male, the female and the male would not have died. Now that sounds kind of strange. What does that mean? Well, you have to remember, again, this is all highly symbolic. And so when they're talking about the male and the female separating, they're talking about two complementary forces. And they're basically saying if these complementary forces had not divided, if they haven't separated, then death wouldn't exist, as in, like the material realm and everything that goes along with that. Because if you remember, if you follow my videos, in Gnosticism, the whole reason that the material world ends up becoming birthed is because one of the eons that is female acts out of harmony and independently from her male counterpart. So in Gnosticism, in the divine realm, the perfect realm of light, the pleroma, everything has a counterpart. Every male has a female counterpart, and this is usually described in terms of androgyny. So it's really the idea that these beings are androgynous beings, but they become separated into male and female counterparts. And when they become separated, this is what gives birth to all the division and chaos in the material realm. So when we're talking about the male and female here, we're talking about different forces, different aspects. We're talking about archetypes. So even if you take a look at the separation of Adam and Eve, so in Gnosticism, particularly in the Secret Book of John, Adam and Eve represent different faculties. So Adam represents mind, and Eve represents epinoia, or purposeful thinking, or mind's ability to reflect on itself. So the idea here is that when you have, and the evil creator god Yaldabaoth separated them to keep them from understanding their divine nature, which means brought forth ignorance. This is a metaphor for bringing forth ignorance into the world by separating or removing the self-reflective ability. Now, of course, in Gnosticism, Adam and Eve have a child, and in their union, this is important, in their union, they unite what was once separated, and in their child, that union exists, and in Gnosticism, that child is Seth, and Seth has the ability to understand its own divinity, and all the descendants of Seth have the ability to understand their own divinity. And that's why that particular brand of Gnosticism is called Sethian Gnosticism, because it's about the Sethians, those who have the ability to understand themselves because of the union, and that divine union led to self-realization. However, what we're talking about today is Valentinian Gnosticism, not Sethian Gnosticism. So they're not the same, but you can see that these themes are highly prevalent. But in Valentinian Gnosticism, you still have the idea that all the divine forces, all the eons, operate in these androgynous pairs, that when it becomes separated leads to division and strife, etc. So there's a huge emphasis on a union of these forces. And you kind of have that symbolically again representative in the Gospel of Philip when Christ kisses Mary Magdalene. It's very, very, very dramatic, by the way. It's the most dramatic you could possibly get. Because in the book, these books are very old. They were discovered near the tombs of Egypt in 1945. They're falling apart. There's pages missing. There's pieces of it missing. It's decaying, etc. So sometimes there's words missing. Sometimes there's whole pages missing. So in the Gospel of Philip, it says, and Jesus kissed Mary on the, and then the word is gone. It's gone. It's not there. Like, come on, you couldn't make that. You couldn't make that more dramatic. I wonder if the person who hid those documents was like, you know what, we're gonna screw with people. Let's just cut this piece out. It's just too good. It's too perfect. So, but anyway, it's very likely that it said on the lips. Very likely it said on the lips. But regardless, Jesus kisses Mary. And in this, kissing, you have this idea of union or almost equality here. And so to me, right, when we talk about Jesus, and this topic isn't about Jesus kissing Mary, but it ties in. To me, a lot of people, when they see, oh, Jesus kissed Mary, then they get into this whole thing about, oh, wow, well, did Jesus actually have a wife? And did that mean that they had children? And who's the descendants of Jesus? And blah, blah, blah. See, to me, I don't look at stuff like that. I look at this stuff as symbolic. So to me, when I see Jesus kisses Mary, I don't start thinking, oh man, did they have a relationship and have kids? And what did they do on their first date? Or no, it's to me symbolic of equality. Jesus Christ showing that Mary is equal to him by kissing her on the lips. And you have this idea too, like in the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus talks about people drinking from his mouth to become like him, or things like that. And then in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is another banned gospel, it talks about how Christ told, his most precious secrets to Mary. And that gospel describes how when Jesus leaves, Mary is the one who takes Christ's place as teacher and leader, and starts teaching the disciples and telling the disciples secrets and things like that. I have a whole video on the Gospel of Mary if you want to check it out. It's really interesting. I highly recommend it. Very, very, one of my favorites. I have a lot of favorites, but it's definitely one of my favorites. I wish it were longer. We just have, again, a lot of the pages were missing from that. So the Gospel of Philip is filled with this symbology of union into an androgynous power. So the bridal chamber ritual in Valentinian Gnosticism is centered around this idea of the uniting of the male and female into an androgyny. So, like I said, a lot of people thought that this was, a sensual act where two people actually did it. We don't know if that's the case or not. But regardless, this was likely only for a select few, and it had to do with achieving union. Now, there's more to it than this as well. Man, there's so much I want to talk about here. It's just so good. So there's also individuals who understand it as not a, how do I put this? Some individuals understand it as coming into union with their guardian angel. And of course, others look at this as uniting with their spiritual twin or inner opposite. And this is really important, and this is what we're going to talk about here. And if anyone's familiar with Thelema or Aleister Crowley or OTO, you'll notice there's a big similarity here to something called knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, where one unites or interacts with or meets its high, in that system, I would interpret that as being the higher self. So here we're either talking about the higher self or we're talking about the mirror self. But let's read a little more of this article before I start getting into all that, because there is a lot to unpack there. So anyway, in the Valentinian school of Christianity, the coupling of the male and female in an androgynous spiritual union symbolized wholeness, perfection, harmony, and stability. So it was about becoming whole. It was about becoming perfect. It was becoming grounded. And according to Madeline Scapello, quote, marriage is the symbol of the pleroma, or fullness of the divine. So the pleroma is the divine realm of light, the perfect realm, where all the eons exist and exist in perfect harmony, and are the creators of all reality and the structures of existence. So the pleroma is the true realm. It's the realm of divine light, contrasted to the realm of matter, which the Gnostics looked at as being a prison and evil and dark. So the idea of unity is tied to the pleroma, where the material world is a world of division and separation. The material world is the realm of division, separation. The pleroma, the realm of divine light, is about unity and fullness, completeness and wholeness. Madeline continues by saying, it is a symbol of knowledge and truth in opposition to the ignorance and falseness of the world. It is a symbol of freedom. So the author of the article here continues by saying, regarding stability, male-female pairs in Valentinian thought is called Syzygies. So yeah, Syzygies is sort of what I was talking about earlier, where you have the eons in those eonic pairs. Those pairs of the whole reason that the material world was birthed, according to Valentinian thought, was because one of the eons acted without its counterpart. And so this caused a rift in reality. This is the belief that, okay, so what are Syzygies? This is the belief that all men had a female spiritual counterpart and all women had a male spiritual counterpart. An important part of salvation or spiritual reunification of male-female pairs was the reunification, into a single, they repeated themselves, I don't know if that's an error, into a single one, a kind of undoing of creation or return to a primordial state of androgynous unity. All right, so again, we have this idea in Syzygies of all men having a female spiritual counterpart and all women having a male spiritual counterpart. So this is very, very interesting. And if anyone is familiar with Jungian psychology, you'll recognize this as being the anima or the animus. So according to Jungian psychology, every male has an inner female aspect called the anima, and every female has an inner male aspect called the animus. And the anima and the animus is very important, and it often gets projected in that we will often be attracted to the individuals that portray the traits of our anima or animus. So we will see an individual and want to unite with them or be in a relationship with them or whatever, because we want to be with them, but really this drives from our psychological unconscious the desire to wanting to unite with our own inner opposite, our own inner female or inner male. So in other words, we have the desire to actually unite with our own inner female or inner male, but instead of doing that, we project that onto an other, and this can drive our attractions. There's many other factors that drive attraction, of course, but that's one of those that can play a part. Now, I just want to say real quick here that in our system, in the Neogenian system of interstar actualization, we work with unconscious archetypes. Now, our concept with relating to this is the mirror self. So the mirror self is similar to Jung's concept of the anima and the animus. However, we realize that while it was very forward thinking for its time, back then in the, 1900s, early 1900s, talking about males having an inner feminine and women having an inner masculine, that was pretty, forward thinking for the time. Today, it's outdated because we know that gender is a lot more complicated than that. It's not binary. So in our system, the mirror self has to do with inner opposites in general, not necessarily working with the archetypes of or not necessarily categorizing things as, oh, if you are a male, then you have an inner female, or if you are a female, then you have an inner male, because there's a lot of things that are in between, gender fluid, gender non-conforming, non-binary individuals, and there's just a plethora of different gender expressions where the inner opposite will take form in a different way. So basically, they're very similar, except in thinking of terms of, all men have an inner feminine and all women have an inner masculine. It's just everyone has an inner opposite. And you don't even have to think about this in terms of masculine and feminine. You can think about it in terms of like right brain and left brain associated hemispheric functions, like logical, linear, analytic thinking versus intuitive, creative, holistic thinking, things like that. So it's really about an interplay of opposites. And this is very important to remember. Whenever we're talking archetypally about male and female, it's about this is a metaphor for different forces of existence, like logical, rational, linear thinking versus intuitive, holistic, creative thinking, like I said, or dominance versus submission, or care versus justice, or whatever. All these different aspects are just different forces of reality, and people use the term male and female to symbolize that. But it's very, very, very important to realize that it's a metaphor and it's symbolic and it's not literal. Because if you believe it's literal, this is where you start getting into problems where people believe like, oh, well, then that must mean that homosexuality is wrong because you don't have a male and a female together. You have a male and a male. And hey, that doesn't make a syzygy. That's contrary to the holy bridal chamber ritual or whatever. So that's very important and critical to realize. Whenever we talk about this stuff, it's symbolic and metaphorical. And this is why in our system, we have the concept of the mirror self, which is a lot more forward thinking, but definitely, Jung did a lot of very great work with regard to this, amazing work. It was, just needs a bit updating for modern times. But anyway, I digress here. What we're talking about now, what's really important is that some people understand this as being a union with one's inner opposite. So some people understand the ritual of the bridal chamber as being representative of uniting with one's inner opposite, uniting with one's spiritual counterpart, or uniting with the mirror self. And this isn't exactly like the higher self. It's a subset of the higher self, but this shares similarity with the, like I said, Thelema and OTO, where there's knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel, which isn't the mirror self, but that is the higher self. But it's still a very, you have a unity going on here, and they're similar in certain ways, and you can see those similarities and these common threads that they have. So we have the idea of the wanting to unite with the inner opposite. Now, what's critical to understand here, remember how just a second ago I was talking about projection and how individuals will be attracted to those who embody their own mirror self traits, because unconsciously the mind desires to unite with that. But because you aren't doing it yourself, it gets projected onto another person, and you are attracted to that person because they display the qualities that you unconsciously desire to cultivate in yourself or to tap into in yourself. So, interestingly, when it comes to the New Age, to New Age ideas, like the idea of twin flames, they've kind of taken mirror self-projection to another level, to kind of like a cosmic level. So, in a lot of New Age systems, they talk about twin flames where everyone has a syzygy or an opposite. But again, it gets projected in New Age, they're not looking for the syzygy or inner or opposite within themselves. They're looking out there for another person. So they believe that there is a particular soul that is your twin flame, that's literally like your cosmic counterpart that you're going to unite with. So to me, this is clear mirror self-projection. It's just taken on a cosmic level now. Instead of thinking, oh, I want to find a partner who embodies these traits, it's now, oh, there is this particular soul that exists across lifetimes that I must unite with. When really it's your own inner unconscious being, please, would you just look inside? I've been trying to tell you for thousands of years, just look inside. God damn it, stop. So anyway, you have this idea of a projected mirror self in New Age on a cosmic scale. Now, of course, can we say for sure 100% with certainty that concept is untrue, that there is another soul out there that's your exact match or whatever? No, but it's there isn't any good reason to support it. There isn't really any good reason to support that idea, particularly because we're all minds in a constant state of transformation. And if there is someone who matches you right now, let's say, in 100 years, you two could alter to be completely different. We're all transforming. We're all in periods of growth. We're going to meet people that we match with for a while, maybe sometimes, maybe a long time, maybe over lifetimes, but we'll meet other people as well. And ultimately, we are all each other's twin flames because we exist in a network mind where we all are inner reflections of each other. All of us together, we're individual nodes, individual souls within a singular that form or compose a singular network mind. So we all complete each other, so to speak, in that way. Even though we are all whole individually, we form that network. We form that, sort of crystalline beads that are all connected together to form that structure, those nodes in the cosmic mind that we form and we are. So anyway, we are sort of all each other's twin flames in that respect. But being that we are these mathematical systems of transforming energy, it's highly unlikely that there is a particular soul out there that's a perfect match for you all the time. We're all changing. We're all evolving. We're all having different experiences. We're all doing so at different rates. So there are probably those that match with you very, very well, and you can spend time with them for quite a long time or lifetimes even, but people change, people transform, people drift apart, people have other interests, people evolve in different directions. You meet other people there. Life is very, very complicated, and paring it down to these really simplistic notions aren't very realistic. So I would think that the idea of twin flames is mirror self-projection, but on a cosmic scale, because that inner opposite is within you. It's found within you, and that is what your unconscious is desiring to find. Now, that's not to say that you can't have soulmate type individuals or reciprocal souls who are, a close match to you, or see, it's really complicated as well, because you can be attracted to people who you're attracted to because they are like you. They're very similar to you, so you feel attraction to them. While contrawise, you can be attracted to people who are the opposite of you. That idea of opposites attract, because you're like, oh wow, you're so different, you're so unique. I've never thought about things in this way, or I've never experienced this spectrum of life before. So I'm not a huge fan of the twin flame idea. I think there's a lot of problems with it. But ultimately, hey, if that's something you believe in, it's not really very problematic. It's not a big deal. It's not a big problem. But that is my opinion on that. I believe that is cosmic mirror self projection, where really it's about uniting with one's own inner mirror, inner opposite. So let's go through this article, because I want to talk more about this ritual. Like I said, there's just so much to unpack here. So it says, this is explained in the Gospel of Philip, which says, when Eve was in Adam, there was no death. If she enters into him again and he embraces her, death will cease to be. This symbolizes the wholeness found within androgyny. And again, remember, this is all symbolic. So male and females uniting into androgyny. Some people might think, well, what do you mean? Do you mean that like androgynous people are more evolved, or that we shouldn't be masculine or feminine? No, that's not the case at all. It's perfectly fine to be masculine. It's perfectly fine to be feminine. It's perfectly fine to be androgynous. This has nothing to do with that. And that's the reason why I often don't like to talk in these terms, because it can get confused that way and lead to a lot of problems. But this is having to do with the symbolic idea of a uniting of opposites together. And we're using things like Adam and Eve and male and female to get this across. At least that's what the Gnostics are doing. So when Eve was in Adam, there was no death. If she entered into him again and embraces her, death will cease to be. So this is the idea. So there's another banned but a banned book called The Apocalypse of Adam. And in The Apocalypse of Adam, I believe it was in that book that Adam describes, I believe Adam is talking to his son or something like that, and talks about how Adam and Eve were originally one being, and then the evil creator God divided them in two. And again, we see something similar in the Secret Book of John, where where Eve is taken from Adam, but not from a rib. Eve is taken from Adam's ability of purposeful thinking, or epinoia. So it's an actual aspect of the mind, a very powerful aspect of the mind, by the way. It's probably one of the most important aspects of the mind. The feminine is given high importance in Gnosticism. Unfortunately, that's downplayed a lot in Valentinian Gnosticism, but especially in Sethian Gnosticism, the feminine aspects are highly explicitly valued as being critical for wholeness and completeness. So it says, we as Westerners may see sexual intercourse as symbol of what the Gospel of Philip was explaining within the bridal chamber. On a deeper, more metaphysical level, Adam is represented by Jesus as the head of humanity, and Eve is symbolized as the church, or all of humanity. And this is important also because we're reading the tripartite tractate, and this is going to be referenced towards the end in the next part that we're going to read. So it's important that we realize this. So Adam and Eve is symbolized as Jesus as being the head of humanity and Eve as the church, or all humanity. So we have a lot of metaphors happening on a different level. You have Christ uniting with the church, and the church just has to do with, every soul that has the capability for gnosis or understanding, all the imperishable souls. And remember that in Gnosticism, Christ as a savior isn't so much a savior as a redeemer of sin, but one who gets one to understand what oneself is, one who is a catalyst for awakening. So Jesus uniting with the church is the idea that Christ will serve as a catalyst for awakening. It's also the idea of the church attaining a higher consciousness. There's a myriad of different metaphors at play. So it says the Valentinians expanded what Paul, or one of his disciples, wrote in Ephesians. It says, when husbands love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave up for her in order to make her holy. Now, I'm not a fan of Paul. I think Paul was an absolutely horrible individual who twisted the message of Christ. So I'm not going to comment too much on that, but I think that Paul absolutely twisted the message of Christ and did a lot of damage to the world because of that. But anyway, it says sometimes other rituals that were associated with the Valentinians, such as baptisms, chrisms, and redemption, were also a preparation and part of the bridal chamber ceremony. So like I said, we might talk about that at a later time. They had other ceremonies, redemption ceremonies, baptismal ceremonies, etc., that led up to the bridal chamber ceremony. The bridal chamber ceremony was the most important. It was the pinnacle reserved for a select few. And again, this is why it was controversial, because it was, only for the select few. And some people think that actual sexual intercourse occurred in the bridal chamber ritual. Again, did it or did it not? We don't know. We don't know if that's true or not. Now, we know that St. Irenaeus accused the Gnostics as being licentious and perverse and promiscuous and engaging in all sorts of unholy deeds, but the church fathers hated the Gnostics, so they were trying to smear their name constantly. So we can't really reliably know if what St. Irenaeus says is true or not, because he's pretty biased, being that he hates the Gnostics. So it says the bridal chamber may not be present in modern day Christianity, but the idea of male and female pairs and sacred sex is part of some esoteric mystery schools and New Age thought, such as soulmates and the coupling of twin flames. Here we go. So, ancient Greek, Mayan, and Egyptian mythology all have myths of male and female couplings that produce oneness, or wholeness, or enlightenment, and a connection to our higher selves. So once again, you can see these themes. These are all archetypes. These are themes for that go across, that span across cultures and traditions in religion. It's the idea of something that was divided becoming united again to achieve wholeness. And as above, so below, this relates to the universe and reality as a whole, as well as our individual selves. When it relates to our individual selves, this is talking about the unconscious versus the conscious. We have our conscious mind, and then we have divided from that our unconscious, which between that lies the veil, and this veil must be pierced and allowed the unconscious to come through in a structured and integrated way. We don't want to just randomly pierce the veil and have all the unconscious come flooding through, or you'll go crazy. That would be like schizophrenia or entering into psychosis or something like that. So it's important to understand when we talk about exploring the unconscious, we mean to do so in a responsible and structured and safe way, where we are examining our unconscious structures and integrating them in a healthy way. But it says some New Agers believe sacred sex as a ritual. Oh yeah, and this is in Tantra as well. Tantra is very much about union with the divine, and is often, but not always, symbolized via sexual acts. Tantra isn't just about sexuality like a lot of people think, but it does. In some traditions, Tantra does involve the sexual act. So yeah, Tantra is a really good example where you have, in some cases, actual sexual acts take place, but this is to embody or symbolize a divine union, a union of opposites into wholeness, into oneness, into embracing the divine unity of reality. And like I said, not all Tantra is sexual, it's just some of it is. So some New Agers believe that sacred sex as a ritual or intention manifests and connects to source energy the quickest. One of the reasons that Aleister Crowley was obsessed with sex magic. Okay, so the thing that we have to understand about sex magic too is that when it comes to sex magic, hey, maybe we'll do a whole video on sex magic at some point. Sex magic isn't, man, I'm saying that word too much. YouTube is not going to want to recommend this video. I'm going to say the word sensual from here on out, okay? And you'll know what I mean. Sensual, I don't know if that's any better. I hate jumping through these hoops on these platforms. Sensual magic doesn't always involve physicality, okay? What sensual magic is, it's all about unity of opposites. Unity of opposites. Whenever there's a unity of opposites, that's S magic. And this can involve the actual act of S, but it doesn't have to. And that's one of the things that I see happen a lot in like mystical and esoteric communities, in which S magic is misinterpreted as always being about the physical act. And there's nothing wrong with the physical act. It can be beautiful and explorative and wonderful as long as it's done safe and responsible and consensually and all that. But it's not always about that. It's just S magic is literally about the union of opposites. That's what it is. And it's a very, very powerful magic. It's ultimately the magic that will restore existence to a pure mental state. But that's a topic for another time. That's a whole can of worms talking about magic. Magic is an allegorical symbolic system. Again, it should be taken as an allegorical and symbolic system. Anyway, it says, nevertheless, the thought of reuniting the male and female parts of ourselves, reunifying our higher and lower selves, can lead to salvation, sanctification, and being part of the fullness, which is what the Valentinians believed. So, in addition to uniting the male and female parts, it can also be about reunifying our higher and lower selves, or our ego selves and our higher self. See, that can be considered an act of S magic, because you're uniting opposites here. So you want to unify your ego self with your higher self. Your ego self is your lower self. Your higher self is the totality of all that you are. And so you don't want to deny the ego. You don't want to destroy the ego, but you want to have the ego working in tandem with the higher self, uniting them so they form a balanced pair. It's kind of like this. Here's a great example. Right brain, left brain is such a great example. Imagine right brain and left brain being separated. You're going to have all kinds of issues because the right brain and left brain associated functions are complementary. So left brain, you have reason, analytical, logical skills, mathematics, linear thinking, linear processing, language. And then the right hemisphere, you have intuition, creativity, art, holistic thinking, meaning, symbolism, creativity, all that. So these are opposites in a certain way. And you can imagine that if they aren't working in tandem, if there aren't synergy, if they aren't forming a syzygy, if they aren't working in synergy, you're going to have a lot of issues. Like, for example, just the simple act of language. Well, language isn't a simple act, but language involves the both left and right hemispheric functions of the brain, where the left hemisphere of the function, left hemisphere associated functions deal with the rules or syntax of language, grammar, sentence structure, word formation, etc., where the right brain hemispheric associated functions deal with the meaning and the purpose, what the sentence is trying to convey. So you need both. You need the left brain to understand the logical structure of language, and you need the right brain to understand what that language is trying to impart, what message it has, what meaning it has. So you need these two systems working together to form a unity that is operating in a way where it has a positive functional aspect to it. Whereas if they're completely divided, well, guess what? You're not going to be able to understand language now. Or if you are, it's going to be in a very strange, divided, fractured, chaotic way. And so you can imagine the unifying of the right and left brain together is a unity of opposites. So this is sort of what's getting across here, is uniting opposites together is critical for a healthy psyche. That is unifying with your inner opposite, because when you unify with your inner opposite, you're going to start to have a synergistic relationship, like right and left hemispheric functions. When you have your ego self and your higher self working together and integrated and united, like right brain and left brain, they're going to be working together. They're complementary, because the higher self is the totality in all that you are, and your ego self is the servant of the higher self. It's your self in miniature that allows you to operate in the social world, or not even the social world, but just in consciousness in general. The ego self is what allows you to have consciousness. It is the aspect of you that is consciousness. So you have that totality of all that you are being expressed in consciousness when you are properly using your ego as a servant of the higher self, and the higher self is seeking to unity. So that would mean things like, in terms of you not identifying with the ego, using your consciousness to be able to internally reflect and explore the unconscious and bring more unconsciousness and integrate it into consciousness. Now you're having a healthy dynamic here. Now you're having a healthy integration. So you can see where this unity is really important. And guess what? It has nothing to do with what's between your legs. I wish I could say certain words. YouTube it's not fun. I can't say fun things. So it's not about what's between your legs. And this is where a lot of people get into a lot of trouble, because there's a lot of sexism and genderism and religion for sure, but also in a lot of esoteric circles and new age circles. Not all of them, but I've seen a lot of it. And it usually stems from this idea of, oh yeah, well, masculine and feminine forces are embedded in reality and it's supposed to be this way. It's like, no, these are simply forces of reality. Reality is frequency patterns. Reality is immensely complex, energetic structures interacting in intricate ways and dimensionalities that we can't even fathom right now. And people are concerned about like what's between your legs. Like, it's so primitive. These concepts are so much higher than these material expressions that we find ourselves in this particular moment in time, and how we have culturally defined certain roles. Like, it's very, very primitive way to look at things. We need to understand that it transcends this. However, we can use masculine and feminine as symbols if we'd like to get across certain ideas, as long as we realize they are symbols explicitly and acknowledge that, so that we don't get wrapped up in dogmatic, discriminatory, prejudice thinking. It's very important. So let's see. Unlike our culture, their view of sacred sex and the bridal chamber was probably non-sexual and more aesthetic, since they considered the physical bodies immaterial and not important. So there is that debate on whether sacred sex, whether the sacred sex of the bridal chamber actually involved S, whether the sacred S of the bridal chamber actually involved it or not. That is in open question, and there's some people who think it did, and other people who think, well, no, it didn't, because the Gnostics didn't even really like the material body. So it's definitely up for debate. It says, so to summarize, the bridal chamber was a ritual that united the male and female, which brought a reunification to an androgynous union representing fullness and salvation. It characterized Christ's marriage to the church. This union was spiritual, non-sexual, and metaphysical, unlike the sacred sex practiced by New Agers today. Yet it has a similar resemblance to the New Age understanding of twin flames and soulmates. So I think the takeaway here, again, I don't agree with absolutely everything in this article. I think one of the things to understand here is that whether S actually occurred in this ritual or not, we don't know. And hey, maybe it did sometimes, and maybe there were different sects of Gnostics who some of them did and some of them didn't. Ultimately, that is an open question. But the important thing to realize is the underlying message that one of the pinnacle achievements of Gnostic thought, particularly Valentinian Gnostic thought, was the unification of complementary aspects into a divine unity. And this is what would give one knowledge of wholeness and gnosis and the pleroma and the fullness. This was the path to understanding the true reality. And this is also, one last thing I want to say here, because this is important. This is important in our system of inner star actualization when it comes to uniting with the mirror self, because the mirror self is the key to the unconscious. All right. So we talk a lot about, last week, we talked about, are you a light darker? We said, are you a light worker or a dark worker? And we talked about the need to integrate the shadow self. This right here is about the need to integrate the mirror self. And the power of the mirror self is that it is the key and the doorway to the unconscious. And here's why. Remember, it contains your inner opposite. All right. So let's take a look at the opposites of reason and intuition. Let's say you're an extremely intuitive individual, highly intuitive, but you don't engage in very much rational thinking. You don't know anything about philosophy. You don't know anything about mathematics. You don't know anything about logic. You don't know anything about that, but you're extremely creative and highly intuitive. Well, here's the thing. Someone like that is going to have access to their unconscious, but they're not going to have the rational skills to be able to structure the unconscious content that they encounter into an accurate representation of reality. And contrary to that, opposite to that, imagine if someone is highly rational, extremely logical, very good at mathematics, very good at philosophy, but is completely divorced from their intuition. Well, this person isn't going to have any access to their unconscious. They'll be able to order ideas into coherent patterns, but they won't have the unconscious content to be able to order into coherent patterns. So essentially what this means is when you unite with your mirror self, you'd have the intuitive person unite with their rational aspect, and you'd have the rational person unite with their intuitive aspect. And this gives one the key to the unconscious by giving one the ability to make the unconscious conscious. Because now when you're united, you can dive into the vast chaotic realm of the unconscious, filled with this chaotic symbolism and rich metaphors and allegories and all of that and imagery, and bring it into consciousness, and then use reason to structure it and order it in a logical, coherent pattern that reflects reality properly by going, oh, okay, I understand that this aspect is actually metaphorical and not literal. It represents this thing, and this is part of my psyche, whereas this represents an aspect of objective reality. I can see that this thing here I experienced, that represents the source, but this other thing that I experienced, that represents my inner shadow self or something like that, and I'm able to organize it. Whereas if someone's completely intuitive with no reason, they're not going to be able to order it. And they're just going to start taking things literally and start believing, not being able to tell fact from fiction. They're in the realm of the unconscious, but they can't integrate it into consciousness very well. Likewise, if someone's all rational, they're going to have no access to any of that, even though they can order and structure things well. So you combine the two together, you unite with your mirror self. Now you have access to the unconscious content that you can bring into consciousness and integrate into consciousness. So you require both. This is why the mirror self is the key to the unconscious and ultimately to so many aspects of the Neogenian system, because the Neogenian system relies heavily on these synergistic aspects. So this is why all of this is so key. Uniting the inner opposite is the doorway. It's the gateway to higher consciousness. It's the gateway to hyper awareness. It's the gateway to inner star actualization. It's the gateway to be able to understand yourself and existence. It is critical. It is key. It is important. And this is why it was one of the pinnacle rituals in Valentinian Gnosticism. So I hope you enjoyed that, my friends. Take a look at my other videos. I have a great video playlist on the Gospel of Mary Magdalene that you may like. And if you want to see videos on the Gospel of Philip, the band Gospel of Philip that talks about Mary kissing Jesus, tell me in the comments and let me know. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so that we can spread this information around and help wake up the world and create a new beginning, a new earth, and a new consciousness right here and right now. If you want to help out and see my channel grow and support my work, support over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/MorgueOfficial, and you'll get access to all of our members only videos, all of them, and there's a new one every single week. So you can support on patreon.com/MorgueOfficial at any tier, or tier 2 or higher right here on YouTube by hitting the join button right below this video. And as always, remember, this isn't church, so don't feel obligated to donate monetarily or to support monetarily. You don't have to. There are plenty of free ways that you can support, like liking and subscribing and sharing my videos and things like that. So I do want to give a big shout out to everyone who does support, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, the Halloween Mom, DB, Enki, Nusalina, Paul Rogers, Eric Fire, Massam, Christopher Smith, and everyone else. Thank you very much.